Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are cracking open China's new strategic blueprint for 2026 to 2030. And let me tell you, this is way more than just another economic report. It's a national strategy to build what you could call Fortress China, getting ready for what its leaders see as a long, tough struggle ahead. And you better believe this plan isn't just going to shape China, it's going to shape all of our worlds.
So, does that sound like something out of a blockbuster movie script? Well, it's not. This is the official language coming from China's top leadership, and it sets this dramatic, defensive, and almost defiant tone for the entire plan. Honestly, this one phrase is the master key to understanding the mindset behind every single policy we're about to talk about. It's this feeling of being under siege. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into the why, the mindset that created this plan. Then we'll look at the nuts and bolts of how China is building its tech and economic fortress. And finally, we'll wrap up by asking, what does this more security-obsessed China mean for its relationship with the US, and really for everyone else?
Right. First things first. To really get this plan, you have to get the worldview that made it. From Beijing's perspective, the world is an increasingly hostile and uncertain place, and this 5-year plan is their answer to that.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Just look at the shift in language here. In the last plan, security was a balancing act with development. Now, it's the absolute center of everything. That Chinese term, duzong, it means struggle. It's popping up everywhere. It signals a huge shift from a focus on peaceful development to one of determined competition in a world they see as an adversary. So, what's the bottom line? This inward turn is a direct response to what Beijing sees as a full-court press, led by the United States, to try and contain its rise. The number one directive is to build a China that can take a punch, that can withstand any shock or pressure from the outside world. Okay, so with that defensive mindset locked in, let's look at how they're actually building this thing. The first pillar of the fortress is a massive high-tech shield, built on a foundation of total self-reliance. Get ready to hear this phrase a lot. New quality productive forces. This is not just another piece of political jargon. It's a signal of a fundamental break from China's old economic engine. You know, the one powered by real estate, endless infrastructure projects, and cheap exports. This is a deliberate, state-led pivot to a whole new model driven by data, cutting-edge tech, and innovation. And here you can see exactly where all that state money and resources are going. This is not some vague wish list. It's a strategic battle plan. And the goal isn't just to catch up in fields like AI, quantum computing, and biotech. The goal is to dominate them globally. So what's the real driver behind this massive tech push? At its heart, it is 100% a national security issue. I mean, think back to what happened with US sanctions on companies like Huawei. That was a huge wake-up call in Beijing. It created this powerful consensus that relying on foreign technology is a critical weakness. This whole push is about insulating China from that kind of pressure, especially when it comes to things like advanced computer chips. Of course, a high-tech shield is only as good as the foundation it's built on. And that brings us to the second pillar of this fortress, a massive effort to re-engineer China's entire domestic economy to make it more resilient and self-sustaining.
This whole dual circulation strategy sounds a bit complicated, but the core idea is pretty simple. It's about strengthening the home front. For decades, China was basically the world's factory. Now, the goal is for China to become its own best customer. The thinking is, if your own 1.4 billion people are buying your stuff, you're a lot less vulnerable to a global recession or trade wars.
And right here, we hit the central problem with this whole plan. You've got this enormous, state-funded push to create more supply, more factories, more tech, smacking right into the wall of weak demand at home. So you have to ask, who is actually going to buy all these new products? And look, this isn't just a small bump in the road. The leadership is facing some truly massive headwinds. You've got a property crisis that has just shattered the wealth of the middle class. Local governments are basically drowning in debt. And on top of all that, the population is shrinking and aging fast, which puts a huge strain on future growth. So the whole strategy is basically a massive gamble. It's a build-it-and-they-will-come approach on a national scale. The leadership is betting that if they just pour money into these new industries, they'll create amazing new products that will somehow create their own demand. But if they're wrong, well, you could be looking at brutal price wars inside China and a flood of cheap exports hitting the global market, sparking all new trade conflicts. So we've covered the tech and the economy, but the walls of this fortress go way, way beyond that. The concept of security now touches literally every single part of Chinese society. Analysts have started calling it the securitization of everything.
And when they say holistic security, they absolutely mean it. We're not just talking about the military here. It's about making sure China can feed itself without relying on food imports. It's about speeding up the green energy transition, not just for the climate, but to achieve energy independence. And it's about making sure the whole financial system doesn't collapse under the weight of all that debt.
So here's the absolute key takeaway from this section. There has been a fundamental change in how China's leaders make decisions. For decades, the mantra was growth and efficiency above all. Now it's security and resilience above all. They are perfectly willing to accept slower growth if it means building a stronger, more self-sufficient nation. Okay, we've seen the blueprint for Fortress China. So now for the big one. What does all this actually mean for the rest of us? For the relationship with the US, for global business, for everything over the next 5 years. This slide just nails the strategic shift. Look at the subtle change in wording. It used to be reform and opening up. Now it's high standard opening up. That little tweak means the world. The old model was about joining the global system. The new model is about using the global system to eventually become independent of it. And this right here reveals the central paradox of the whole plan. On one hand, China's turning inward. On the other, you hear things like this from top officials. So what gives? Well, China still wants foreign investment, especially in high tech. But the message is crystal clear. It's on their terms now. The welcome mat is out, but only for companies that help China achieve its own strategic goals. So let's just spell it out. For the US and everyone else, this means a few huge things. First, that tech race in AI and chips, it's about to go into overdrive. For any foreign companies working in China, the rulebook just got a lot more complicated and political. And you can bet we'll see a more assertive China trying to position itself as the leader of the global South, offering an alternative to the Western world order. When you boil it all down, this plan is a comprehensive strategy for a nation that's battening down the hatches. It's a blueprint to build a more resilient China, one that's technologically advanced, economically self-sufficient, and strong enough to handle whatever storms its leaders believe are gathering on the horizon.
And that leaves us with one final crucial question we all have to think about. Is China building this fortress just to defend itself from what it sees as a hostile world? Or is it building a base from which to challenge the existing global order? The answer to that question is going to define global competition and cooperation for the next decade, and probably a lot longer than that.